Welcome, everyone. We're going to start the 139th meeting of System Thinking Ontario. We're going to have a conversation. The build agenda for this was conversation as process and connection. And I'm actually going to hijack that because we've been working hard on the problematique dialogue. So I'm going to explain what that is a little bit before Gary gets into it. But before we start, as usual, so Dan will be moderating. I'll ask if he could actually moderate us through introductions, please, Dan. If Dan comes off mute.
We'll start with Mr. Hawk, Mr. David Hawk.
What do I have to do? Just say my name?
Yeah, okay, I should go through that. You should say
no swear words.
No swear words. You should say your name. You should say where you're calling from, and you should talk about how you came to system thinking.
Okay. I'm calling from a place in Iowa, sort of in the middle of my farm or whatever it is, and I came into systems thinking. You mean this program or in life?
Either, both. It's a dyadic.
In life, it came because Russell Ackoff invited me into a system science PhD program as his first student in a new program he was experimenting with. And that was primarily because the city planning faculty had flunked a thesis I did. And he liked that thesis very much and went to their faculty meeting to convince them to change it. Then afterwards he said, since I did this for you, for me, you're going to join a new PhD program. And so I said, yes, sir. Then he said, I like that. And then we continued to argue for the next 20 years.
Thank you, David. So I have on my screen Anna Burkhodorova. Did I say that right?
Yeah, good
enough.
Okay. Hi, and I know that I'm going to follow that introduction. Hi, I'm Anna. I'm calling from Toronto, Ontario. The easiest way to explain my way get into systems thinking, I am a student at SFI program, in SFI program at OCAD. David and Stephen, who are on the call here today, have been my professors, and I am recognizing a number of people on the call. So here I am, forever stuck in systems.
Thank you, Anna. So Stephen Salette is next.
Hello, I'm in Toronto. I'm connected in with a group from a number of years, and I work a lot with spatial approaches, large group workshops, and sociodrama. And I'll pass it. Shall I just pass it on, or Dan?
Well, you can. Kelly's supposed to be doing it next, I think. Yes, you, Kelly. You're next on my screen. But you have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
I did. Hi, I'm Kelly Okamura. I came into systems through Design with Dialogue and Peter Jones, and I have been part of David Ng's, System Changes Learning Group for a while. I'm currently just starting into a doctorate program for business administration.
Thank you, Kelly. Allison Clark, please.
Hey, Allison, I'm in Toronto. I'm joining with Anna and Nadine, who are also in the OCAD SLab program, and David and Stephen Davies were the ones to introduce me to systems. So here I am.
Thank you. And next up is Jenya Nee.
Everyone, my name is Jenya Nee, and I'm based in Toronto as well. I'm a strategic economics-based consultant, and what I'm doing now is helping to solve complex problems through humanity embodiment and neuroscientific workshop approaches. I came across Dan, David, and the systems learning group at the RSD, not this one, but 5 years ago.
Thank you, Jenya. Kala Lee.
Hi, I'm Kala. I'm an SFI graduate and had many of professors here as well through
Peter Jones and Stephen Davies, David Ng, even though not through my year, but continue through Systems Changes Learning Circle as well. I work with Fran and Zayon at Method Collective, and we also co-founded the Space for Grief project as well.
Thank you, Kayla. Anna Checkman, please.
My name is Anna Checkman, calling from Toronto. I am currently teaching a course at York University called Designing for Existing Systems. I wish Russell Akoff invited me to his PhD program, but I think this is the next best thing. So I try to attend Systems Ontario as often as possible to just keep my brain alive.
Thank you, Anna. Ian Prisloo. You have to unmute Ian.
Thank you. Hi, Ian Prinslow, located here in Toronto. Came to systems thinking through various different authors and then worked on systems thinking projects, systems change projects through different organizations.
Thank you, Ian. Zayan.
Everybody, I'm Zayan Hussain. I'm based out of Toronto, and I came through to systems through, I'd say, a series of mistakes and wrong turns, but I love it. We're here. Jokes through Peter Jones' Design with Dialogue a long time ago. I did my master's at OCAD's Strategic Foresight Innovation. As Kala mentioned, Fran, Cal, and I use a lot of systems thinking to explore policy design and human behavior. And always happy to be here for a long time now. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberto Perez. Well, you have to unmute there. Yeah.
I did and double tap. Anyway, hi, I'm Roberto Perez. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I'm also an SFI student, so lots of familiar faces on this call, and I'm here because I'm really interested in systems. So really want to hear what Gary has to say today, and David as well. Big fan of both their work.
Thank you. Peter Scott.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Peter Scott here. I'm at OCAD University, teach at OCAD in the undergrad program, and I've also taught in the SFI program, and I'll be tuning in.
Thank you. Stephen Davies.
Hey, Dan. Stephen Davies is my name. I'm here in Toronto, just like many others. I teach at OCAD University in the SFI program, currently teaching systems this winter with David's incredible support. And I came to systems through Lego.
All right. Thank you. Teresa Daniel.
Oh, I came to systems because of Gary Metcalf. And I watched what happened to his brain when he was working on his PhD. And I said, someday I want that to happen to my brain too. And later, I ended up in a PhD program in human and organizational systems from Fielding. And I'm happy to be here in support.
Thank you, Teresa. Mm-hmm. David Ray. David Ray, is he there? He unmute? I don't know. Give him a second. All right, we'll go to Badr Eat Ahmed. I hope I said that right. Okay.
You said it right. Badr from Montreal. I'm consultant in people and analytics and workforce planning. Day to day, I'm a lot of working in transformation. And I'm just curious. I want to awaken my spirit with new ideas.
Thank you. Daisy Tam.
I'm from Toronto as well. I just have no idea how I stumbled upon David and Peter Jones, but and I just joined off and on. But I really enjoyed these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Abby Van Meter.
says she can't unmute or turn on her mic, but she's in
Oh, I see.
Indianapolis.
Oh, I
And
see. Okay.
She came to RSD conference in Oslo, so Toronto's closer
Okay.
than Oslo.
All righty. Thank you, David. Franziska Bieler.
Hi, Franziska.
Franziska, sorry.
No, it's okay. We are both from Toronto, calling in from Toronto, and I've been thinking about systems for about 15 years when I did my master's, and now work as an educational consultant.
And my name is Sean Patrick Stencil. I work in the environmental advocacy sector, so think a lot about how to change the system.
Thank you. Eileen Nandy. No?
Hey everybody,
Okay.
it's me, Aileen, calling in from Toronto. Yet another SFIer. Delighted to be part of the same cohort as Allison and Anna, and often crossing paths with Roberto and others, including alums like Fran and Kala and Zayan. Hey everyone.
Thank you. Frances Rawlings.
Everyone, my name is Fran. I'm from Toronto. Sorry, I'm off camera today, but it's nice to see some of you. What brought me into systems is initially very frustrated earlier in my career when I was working frontline, writing a lot of grants, feeling like I was going in circles in the nonprofit sector, and wanted to understand what was happening, which eventually led me to the SFI program, and then into us creating Method Collective and Space for Grief. And I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you, Francis. Is David Ray back now? We've skipped over the first time. I guess not. So I'll let Gary introduce himself because we're at that point, right?
Well, I can do the introduction, or David, do you want to go ahead and do yours, and I'll just do mine as a part of the presentation, however you want to do that.
You might as well go first.
Okay. So I'm Gary Metcalf. I am currently in Ashland, Kentucky, very small town where we live most of the time, split time between here and Atlanta. I came to systems through my PhD work at Saybrook University, where Bela Banathy was my mentor and PhD supervisor there, and it's going to be a lot of his work that I'll be presenting about the conversation tonight.
Thanks, Gary. So I'm David Ng. I came into systems at the same time at a meeting, a Russell Akoff meeting, where I met David Hawk for the first time. So I'm going to share slides. I'm actually hijacking this meeting a little bit. Gary wasn't expecting this, but he can roll with it. I'm going to have let me just get this down. My video panel. I'm going to have a advanced call for participation for Problematique Dialogue. How do I get rid of this hide voting meeting control? There we go. Okay. So let me describe. We're going to orient towards questions. So we're talking about this Problematique Dialogue. When and where is it? What is it? Why we're going to do it? Who's involved? And then in the how section, this will actually go into Gary's talk. Because he'll describe more details about the Banathy Conversation Methodology. So the Problematique Dialogue is hosted by sLab. It's a slow conversation. We're looking for 4 teams of 8 systems thinkers for 2026. The reason for the 4 teams of 8 system thinkers is a practicality, because Gary will be leading the Banathy Conversations. He has the most experience doing that, and we can't handle more than that. So we also have some facilitators in training as we're going along. The event scheduling is Sunday, May 10th, 5 p.m. to Friday, 12 noon. That's between Grad X and Victoria Day. So there's this window at OCAD when the facilities are actually, in theory, open. This is a retreat-style event. The way we should think about this is not so much as a 9 to 5, as it's more like actually going away and going away for a retreat that is all immersive. And I'll explain a little bit more about the history of the Banathy Conversation, but they're full day dialogues. You have lunches with your team of 8. And you have dinners generally across the teams. And so there's a lot of conversation that happens, and maybe later on in the conversation, we can get Fran and Kala and Zian, to discuss what happens when you're not in the daytime. The start, stops, and breaks are negotiated in the team. And so we're trying to modernize here. So it's not that you have to be chained into a meeting. We actually allow people to use the internet, do all the normal things you do. If you have family things to do, then we expect you just negotiate with your team. If people want to start a little bit later, that's fine. If people want to break a little bit earlier, that's fine. There's a schedule that Gary maintains overall for the whole schedule, but a lot of this is self-organized within the team. The usual event timeline for a Banathy conversation, they have these phases. Preparation's normally done online for 2 to 6 months, and it's an agreeing phase where you have topics and participants. You're trying to get to a triggering question, and the question will be, what is a topic you want to focus on, and how do the teams form? On Sunday, May 10th, we'll start off with a gathering. We'll convene at OCAD and then probably go out for dinner in Chinatown. Monday to Wednesday, we'll be exploring in our teams. That's when you actually have the long conversations that Gary will explain more about. By Thursday, you're in reflection mode, where you're summarizing what people had discussed, you're sharing your insights. And then you go into proceedings development, which is done online, hopefully within 3 to 6 months after the experience, of recollecting, creating an executive report on the experiences that you had so other people can refer back to them. And in the history of the Banathy Conversations I've been at, it's quite often that someone says, someone already discussed that topic. And you end up and go look at the proceedings and yes, 5 years ago, they already discussed the same thing. So you have a little bit better start than starting from scratch. The isolation that they had in Banathy Conversations started in 1981 because they really were full retreats. And for 2026, we're reshaping this into something that will be run by an urban university and the internet. So the venue will start on person in campus at OCAD. We may have some off-campus visits. It's not uncommon with the Banathy Conversation to take an afternoon off and go somewhere anyway, but we haven't got all the details worked out if we may decide to have another venue and just go there for a change. Online, we'll be using the Google Workspace that's available from the CSRP Institute, and we can see this potentially as the first of an annual series. There's been a break in Banathy Conversations, and we've been doing some with CSRP Institute, but we'd like to actually create it a more permanent home for it, and OCAD could be the opportunity to do that. The resources we're looking at, the first year that we're doing right now, it's unfunded. If anyone has any sponsors and they want to come into sLab, that'd be great. The usual precedent has been that we ask 100 euros or 150 Canadian for participation. If people can't afford that, we can negotiate that. The tradition with conversations is that people actually self-fund the travel and lodging. When we're in Austria, the meals were actually included. But recently, when we've been running it with CSRP Institute, we've been doing things like running to the grocery store and getting lunches, occasionally going out for restaurants. If from the 150 Canadian we probably could afford to get healthy snacks at breaks so people don't have to leave every couple of hours and get coffee and things like that. In future years, sLab may propose that we'll have grants or research assistance, those sorts of things, but we've decided not to let that get in the way for this year. So what's a problematique dialogue? So the exploring of problematic situations embraces multiple perspective systems approaches through dialogue. Let me break that into 3 parts: the problematique, the systems approaches, and the dialogue, which is the Banathy methodology. So a problematique is a system of interrelated problems. Metcalf calls it a mess. If you go back to Osbicon, the Club of Rome, they're the ones that created the term problematique. There's some commonalities with the idea of wicked problems, and there's some commonalities with the ideas of polycrisis that's become popular. The system approaches that are probably most valuable right now, given where we are in the world of deglobalization, if I could say, is panarchy, which is about ecological resilience, regime shifts, socio-ecological systems, and also the pacing changes work that we've been doing with contextual dyadic system changes learning. So if people don't know the system approaches, that's part of the education as we go along. The dialogue and the Banathy methodology, we actually focus on the inquiry as questions more than answers. We're not likely to get to solutions within a week. We're not trying to solve the world's problems, but we are trying to learn that we could help and hopefully co-evolve a design that we could at least improve things a little bit. It's an open-ended exploration, non-prescriptive surfacing of assumptions and values. This is why it takes a long time to actually get to know people and understand what the assumptions are and what their values are. It's a generative reframing guided with process integrity towards preferred systemic redesigns. For those of you who think it's an unconference, it's actually more structured than a unconference, but somewhat less structured than a conference where people stand up and present stuff. What's a problematique? I'll use Russ Akoff. He says, if planning involved only independent problems, it would be nothing but multiple problem solving. So we're talking about a set or two more interdependent problems that constitute a system. The French call it a problématique, and Russ Akoff calls it a mess. So the mess is a system. If you take apart the system, then you lose the properties that are in the mess. The solution to the mess, Russ likes solutions. I'm not sure you can actually, I think he would like to absolve or dissolve the solution. Depends on how the solutions to the parts interact. So you can't take the problematique apart. There may be parts that you can work on, but you should be dealing with the mess as a whole systemically. Okay, why are we doing this? So conversations were initiated by Bella Banathy in 1980 as an alternative to conferences. And we're talking about scientific conferences where people, professors used to get up and actually read the papers, which is a dreadful thing. IFSR conversations were run for a long time. The IFSR is the International Federation for Systems Research. It's an organization of organizations. So members of the IFSR include the International Society for the System Sciences and the American Society for Cybernetics, as an example. They ran the conversations biannually from 1982 to 2018 in Austria. That was in conjunction with the European conference that they had that would dodge Easter, but it was usually before the weather had gotten really warm. Participation was by invited systems researchers worldwide. It was partially funded by the Austrian government. It started off at a fishing resort before the season when people actually fish. Eventually, towards the end, they were meeting in converted monasteries, which are actually a great place to have a retreat. The Banathy Conversations were run recently by CSRP Institute. The Creative Systemic Research Platform Institute is a systems institute focused on community resilience and ecological practices. It was started in 2017 by Susu Nosala at Tongji University in Shanghai and is incorporated as not-for-profit in Switzerland in 2020. So in October 24, we met in Lugano in Switzerland. In 2025, we met in Iowa at David Hawk's farm. Thanks, David. For those who are planning ahead and would like to get involved, they're working towards a 2026 conversation in Vietnam because one of the researchers, actually a French graduate student, is doing research in Vietnam, so in medical. And so if you're interested in that, we can talk about that separately. Reinvigoration of the sLab is something we've been working on since last fall. But it's an opportunity for the Banathy Conversation to evolve as a new hub. If we look at Mary Edson's What is the IFSR Conversation, we can build on their established practices. Bella defined a conversation as collectively guided disciplined inquiry, an exploration of issues of societal significance engaged by scholarly practitioners and self-organized teams who select a team for their conversations, which is initiated in the course of preparation phase that leads to an intense face-to-face learning phase. And so the past topics were listed in that paper. These were hardcore systems researchers by the leading systems people in the world. What we're looking for in the sLab is potentially a next generation. I already claimed that Toronto is a hub for system thinking. We just need to elevate a little bit more. We want to refocus a little bit, not so much on the basic systems ideas, but on differences that make a difference. And so that's why we actually are taking a variant and we're saying we want to focus on problematique. We also want to bridge the gap between introductory systems courses, as students at SFI get, and authentic recognized authorities that know more about systems, because we hear that people want more systems education. It's like, well, we can do that. One of the ways of doing it is to do it slowly and engage with elders in the community. And so we can invite some of the people that we know from the IFSR, from the ISSS, to come to Toronto and participate with us. So who's going to go? So the first step of a Banathy conversation is this dance between the topic-seeking participants and teams converging on a topic. And it can go either way, that if someone has a major topic and they want to lead that, and then they can find participants that'll come on with them. The other is that if a team just likes working together, systems thinking tends to be very broad. So quite often they say that, I want to work on this topic. Everyone says, oh yeah, I'll join that team just because it's fun to work on that team. But we go either way. What we're looking for at this point is 4 leaders who would actually lead the teams of 8. The responsibilities for that person would be actually managing through the processes, agreeing, which is done online, negotiating a triggering question, gathering and sharing existing resources. Then when we actually come in person, gathering, so establishing the daily activities and schedules for the 5 days, exploring, coordinating the direction of processes and the tools, making sure people have flip charts, those sorts of things, reflecting, getting some people together to do the Finding Morning Plenary, and then recollecting, which is editing the proceedings that relate the experiences and insight that come. The invitees to a conversation more often come through personal ties rather than open call to public, which is why it's been a little strange going, should I present this, should I not present this? Are we open, not open? But generally, it's people that know each other because we expect individuals who welcome collective learning rather than defending a position. A conversation, everyone learns, and so it's not like coming to a conference where you have a paper that's already done. Often what happens is that it's people who are exploring something new, and then they join together, and that eventually may result in a team forming that would move research forward or move an agenda forward. But it's a good place to start when you're trying to get some basics down. We mix subject matter experts with some authentic system researchers. There's a lot of people that claim to be systems researchers that aren't. Because we're in Toronto, it's probably mostly Canadians. We do welcome international people if they want to come to Toronto. And often we have students, mostly at the graduate level, and for anyone that is working on a thesis, a major research project that actually wants systems people to help them along, this is an opportunity for you to do that in May. So Katia Castro, then Laszlo, quoted some of the works. She was also a student of Bella Banathy, and Bella had described the conversation like a conference, except it's the part of the conference that you usually have in coffee breaks. So all the best conversations, all the learning happens in the coffee breaks, not in the sessions. So the week-long coffee break, she said, is an embodied experience of radically systemic, participatory, and empowering education. If you're interested, let's talk. You can talk to me or any of the people that have been involved with this. The only formality we'll eventually have is applicants submit a position paper, a couple of pages, a brief biography. But that happens after we've actually figured out what are the topics and what are the teams. There's a list here of, I'll call them the bootstrap initiators. We've actually been meeting since December. So Greg Van Alstein, Peter Scott, Zad Samad, Dan, Zian, Kala, Fran, Aileen, Allison, Stephen. We've actually been discussing these things, and so the slide deck you see is actually a result of the conversation we've been having. For 2026, the dialogue, we will have some volunteer facilitators. If you've been to a Banathy conversation, then it helps because there's ways that it's run, and Gary will actually be mentoring those volunteers to actually, in effect, run their own conversations. And if this is not for you, because not everyone can do 5 days, sLab reinvigoration, we have other events and other formats, other purposes we're discussing. So don't take this as the only thing that sLab is doing. So with that, I'm going to switch over and let Gary take the helm for a while. I can figure out how to unshare. Okay. Maybe there. Nope. Okay. How do I find Zoom and release this? There you go. There you go.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks, David. So, yeah, we've covered a lot of some of the basics of it. So let me walk you through really more of the history and the why about the conversation, beginning with Bela. So to understand the conversations, you really need to understand a bit about Bela himself and where he came from. He was Hungarian, raised in Hungary. Scouting was a really big influence on him. And the reason that's important is because it led to Bela's work in leadership. He actually developed leadership programs from the time he was in the military in Hungary through later years, when he developed a leadership program that was adopted by the Scouts called the White Stag program, which actually is still in operation. Bela was wounded during the war. He escaped with his family to what essentially was a refugee camp in Austria, where he was there for 6 years. His wife Eva had a sister who was actually able to take their 2 sons out of the refugee camp to be able to help care for them better. They had 2 more children in the camp. And so by the time Bela was actually, his father had been a minister. He was ordained as a minister later, was taken by the Ministerial Association to the U.S., which is how he was able to immigrate. But it wasn't like it was really simple. His first job at the seminary in the U.S. was shoveling coal at night into the furnaces to keep the seminary warm. He was fortunate enough to then be given a position at the Language Academy, the language school in Monterey, California. But it was actually 10 years between the time they entered the refugee camp and the time that they were reunited with their 2 older children in the U.S. He finished his doctoral degree in EDD at Berkeley in 1966, which I guess led to him then being able to move into, essentially it was a Department of Education funded research program called the Far West Labs. There were multiple labs like this around the country back when the U.S. cared enough about education to do those things. It wasn't until 1982, Bela was 63 years old, before he formally came into the systems community. He joined Saybrook. He began the systems program there. Around the same time, they also joined what was, at that time, there was a precursor to the ISSS, so the General Systems Research, Society for General Systems Research, the SGSR. Bela was in his early 70s before he began writing his books, and obviously got really prolific during that time. The importance of understanding Bela's work in leadership was that I think, even though I never talked with him much about that work, by the time I had met him at Saybrook in 1995, he was well on his way into doing formal systems work and talking about that as social systems design. Idealized social systems design was his approach at that time. One of the miraculous things to me was seeing how much Bela might have been absolutely jaded about people in life, given his experiences. And he was anything but. He was not only one of the most positive people I'd ever met, he was one of the most generous people I'd ever met. And so his work in leadership must have been a lot of what took him into believing in the need for people to understand their own self-empowerment. So after, a lot of speculation, I was kind of proud of my quote about the need for people to understand their own choosing of their lives. My wife pointed out that Steve Jobs had said something very similar earlier, so I thought, well, maybe I ought to at least give some attribution. But the point is, this to me is an absolutely critical piece of people understanding the need to develop their own sense of autonomy, of agency, in order to impact the lives and the communities that we have. This is where as David described, the origins of the conversation really came out of scholars, academics, just understanding the value that they had with each other was in the collaboration with each other, not in the presentations of papers, which at that time still involved people standing and reading papers from lecterns. The value was in people collaborating and learning together. So this is the location where the first conversations were held, the C. Winkle Hotel. The little house, the White House to the left of the hotel, the hostel actually, was where the Van Fursters lived with their children, and they owned and ran that hostel. And they would open it up a week before the season started to allow for the teams of the conversation to go there. And it was as quiet and as idyllic, I think, as they could have found. That didn't last, though, because, the Van Fursters aged, their children got older, they brought in managers to actually run the hotel, and it just didn't stay as it was. And so we had to move across the lake to a different place, which was essentially a hotel for fishing. They had fishing tournaments, and so a lot of the time in the hotel across the lake, the meeting space was the landings between floors where we would gather chairs and prop up flip charts and have to work around the fishermen coming in and out and filling up the bar at different times during the day when we had to work around using that. So it was still a nice location, just not really ideal for meeting. A part of the way that Bela continued developing the conversations was actually back through the Far West Labs and through the institute that he set up in California, which was the International Institute for Systems Studies. This was the location that we held under the ISI, the International Systems Institute, the conversations there were held pretty much every year at Sylmar, which is a state park in California near Pacific Grove. Another pretty nice setting. And so they managed to find places where we really could get away and be away, so that people had the chance to not only meet quietly together, but also get out and take walks, enjoy nature in a way that was very conducive to the thinking and reflecting that needed to happen. The beginning of the conversation events were very much focused on the kind of global problems that the Club of Rome had done in the Problematique. By the time I met Bela and he was working at a different approach to the conversations, it really was around idealized social systems design. And the idea that we would be designing not only for ourselves, but for the future and for our children's future and beyond them was absolutely critical to his understanding. And so the beginning of the giant circle of everyone in the conversation together at the first day began with one empty chair in the circle, which represented the generations to come. Not to forget that the impact of what we were doing today was meant for them as well. The notion of dialogue, you can see this is Bela's 1996 version of description. At that point, he had started learning about David Bohm's process of dialogue and began to really incorporate that as the piece of generative dialogue that became a part of the conversation that, combined with the previous approaches, became a process of moving from generative to strategic dialogue during the conversation. In the early 2000s, as I had taken over as president of the IFSR, the fishing hotel just became really inadequate. And so working with Gerhard Krust and the other members of the board at the time, Gerhard had taught at the university in Linz. And so he was able to find a place that had been a converted, maybe had been a monastery of some kind there as well, up on the top of the hill. But you can see the bottom left, the meeting space was much, much more conducive to the kind of work we did. Still having, a large forest out in the back and places that we could get outside to be able to do the kind of casual thinking and reflecting that needed to happen. So conversation is a unique event in my experience. Now, people are familiar with a lot of other kinds of meeting, planning, from brainstorming all the way through things like World Cafe, Search Conference, Teams Integrity. Gordon Pask had his own version of conversation theory that he called much more cybernetically driven, and even to things like Strategic Democratic Dialogue. Aleko Kostakis and the Agoras group still practice that and are very active in doing that. They're all different, they're all important in their own ways, but in my experience, they aren't one and the same with conversation. So, as David described, the first phase, and this is from a more ideal kind of version when Bela was working on the development with ISI. The identifying of the topics, the establishing of the teams, the recruiting members, or beginning to identify potential members, that all happened in this first phase. And as they described it, this began about March, went through April, just to get that part done. In this version of conversation, they spent 6 months doing all the preparation. So this was the developing of concepts, the passing around of papers and ideas, the getting to know each other in preparation with the teams. And that's not a hard and fast timeline. But, at the time these were going on, it took about that much time to actually do the collaboration and coordinating with the teams. The conversation itself has always been about 5 days. And it is because the first day is simply as much preparation as go into these. The first day is the getting to know each other in a different kind of way. It's the building of trust. It's the beginning to understand each other together in a way that you can start that kind of thinking together to get to a deeper level of discussion and understanding of whatever the topic is. So the first into the second day is an exploration time. What is important about this? Why are we digging into this? What is it that we need to understand that's not just simply finding research about a topic? What do we need to understand that is the reason behind it? That expands and continues until there's a need to begin converging. And so by day 3, moving into day 4, there really is a need to begin narrowing down from the large exploration to the what are we going to do with these ideas. By the end of day 4, those are done in such a way, they're summarized so they can be presented to the other teams and eventually presented in a way that they can make sense to a larger public outside. And that's what turns into the proceedings and or journal papers and or other kind of scholarly work that it can be the outcomes of what the teams have done. And now that's not necessarily formal kind of research papers. Sometimes the preceding papers are simply, what did we learn? What did we do? What can we build on? Because those teams may very well take their work into yet another cycle of the same kind of process. So in some ways, academically, you can think of this as a year-long action research project, which can become a next iteration of an action research project as the teams begin to evolve and learn and maybe add new members, maybe take their topics to the next level. So let's step back from the conversation itself and just think about where we are and why there is any importance to doing something maybe different. So we communicate as humans for a lot of different kinds of reasons. We work to inform, to persuade, to influence, to build relationships, to cooperate, coordinate our actions, and it's simply sometimes to get things done. There's a lot of reasons that we express, collaborate, communicate with each other. We aren't always clear about which those are, by the way. So it's not unusual that we have people working together who are doing a lot of these things in different ways at the same time, not always being clear about the exact intent of their part in that. Which is how we get to meetings. Meetings, the bane of most organizations, meetings which are considered absolutely necessary, and the thing that most people do not want on their calendars. So what is it that how do we devolve to this kind of communication when what we really need to do is to arrive at some kind of better understanding? Social media has created a world of possibilities and an exceptional number of additional nightmares. So we text and we tweet and we send sexting things and we retweet and we repost and we produce all kinds of things that in effect are more communicating at each other than they are communicating with each other. So we've ended up with, what is the reaction that you get from what you say to somebody online? And it's, I get likes, or I get attention, or I get more of whatever that is. But it, in my experience, is almost anything but reaching some true understanding with other people. So why a conversation? Because it really is a different chance for people to learn together. It's a chance for people to explore topics in a way that I just don't know another venue that provides quite the same thing. And it's why we still devote 5 days of people working together in order to accomplish this. So what I want to do is take a turn and begin to work a little bit on dialogue just for a few minutes, beginning with this. Is being heard important? And if so, why? And what I'd like to do is, because I expect a few people have some thoughts, and I want to allow for those, but if you'll take a couple of minutes, and if you have a thought about this, put it in the chat. Because I'd like everybody to get a chance to respond to it, and we'll just take a minute to give folks a chance to do that. So for sake of time, I'm going to let people keep entering those in, and I'm going to move to this prompt for some actual discussion. And what I'm curious about is, when's the last time that you felt like you were truly heard by another person? And I want to allow people to actually talk together now. So the raising your Zoom hand is probably the most efficient way to be able to speak. For some of you, if you raise your hand, Zoom may pick it up as raising your physical hand. But if you go down to the react little heart at the bottom of the Zoom screen and you hit that, you'll find a raise hand symbol down there. And so, any thoughts? When's the last time you were in a place, a situation, where you truly felt heard by another person? Peter.
Yeah. As I was saying, I teach at OCAD University, and Mondays are very, very busy for me. And so I taught 2 classes today,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like we're in week 5 right now, and it's been a little bit stressful for me because I don't usually teach 2 class back to back 6 hours straight over 6 hours. But what's interesting about that is that the intensity that you've talked before, the intensity of teaching and talking is something that is really unique, a little bit akin to what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And so it's something that gives me pleasure to tell stories and talk gives me pleasure. And today in class, I actually showed a video clip of some of the topics that I've been talking about. So I showed a video clipping to my student, and one of the students I felt resonated with the takeaway that I was trying to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt heard by that student because I was actually going to provide that takeaway to the class, but that student ended up providing the takeaway for me. And so I felt very heard today in class.
Good. Thank you, Peter. And anybody else? Zayan. Oh,
One thing to throw in, I realize I feel like I feel heard. It like I'm lucky on we have a team where we hear each other out about things, even if it's tricky. It takes a lot of conversation sometimes, but made me realize that from a systems lens, being heard is a way, almost an essential way of helping other parts of a system that might not be as familiar with another validate experience or learn about. So in a sense, it's an essential part of a system that would be self-learning or curious about other systems or how it connects to other systems.
So
but from a human standpoint, it feels good being heard. Like,
good. Thank you, Zayan. Aileen?
So I had an experience today. I'm currently working with a client, and they have another consultant engaged doing project management work and documenting processes. So I was explaining to this project manager a process that I had observed and I was trying to improve for the client. And it was just really funny having the experience of that person who was determined to really understand what I meant. And it gave me such an appreciation how long it takes when the other person really wants to make sure they understand. It was like such a drastic, felt like such an artificial and such an extended conversation from how we usually listen to each other.
Thank you. Roberto.
Sorry, the unmute takes a second. Yeah, it was interesting today. I felt really heard today because I was tacking something I was helping an old colleague of mine with a technical issue. And we were doing a bit of research on the ground, and he was kind of cleaning up and reverse engineering someone else's work. But he felt heard, and I felt like I was heard in the process of just reinforcing listening in order to actually truly understand the problem before we went solutioning. So we took a long time to really dive deep and get into the nitty-gritty details of what we were actually trying to solve for before we went solutioning. And that was just like a beautiful moment of shared understanding, and both like feeling like we were listening to each other. It was a really nice moment that I had today.
Thank you. So what's it like not to be heard?
Can I just call out? I think Kelly has something to contribute. She was asking in the chat how to put up her hand to speak.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes, Kelly, please.
Thanks very much. I still don't know where that chime is, but I wanted to contribute in terms of feeling heard.
Good.
Working as a change scout and working with our major brands and retailers, what I had to say to them was not something that they wanted to hear. But over time, I would hear different feedback that in their own time, they understood what I was saying and that it was important. So even though it wasn't something that I was financially rewarded for, I could appreciate that the change message sat with them and eventually resonated in their own time that they needed to process it.
Thank you. So any thoughts about the opposite? I mean, what's it like? What does it feel like not to be heard? Anna.
Well, on the topic of not being heard, of course, I think about my childhood straight away, right? Like my parents not hearing me. So sometimes it feels like you don't even exist. Like, it's like, who am I talking to? What am I trying to say? Like, who am I even? And sometimes, like, I thought about it, we don't ever see ourselves in 3D, right? Like we cannot see ourselves in 3D. We can see ourselves in a 3D image or like a reflection in a mirror. The other people are the only ones who see us in 3D. And so if nobody really sees us, it's like we're two-dimensional in a way. I don't know. It doesn't feel good, right? On an existential level.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, absolutely. So, Badr.
It's depends. I'm talking from my experience. It depends the age or the maturity where you are in your life. Sometimes you be stuck on this moment, and maybe you don't move on. And yes, maybe the situation is gone, the person or it's not anymore, but you are stuck in this situation. With the age, you may say it's not important. It's not meant, and everybody go its path. But when I was young, it's like I start to be prisoner of this situation because I didn't have chance to express myself or get hurt.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I'm going to take a bit of a different take on this being heard thing. I think when you asked that question, you were really directing it to us, like to me. How would I feel? And I thought about that question, and I realized something that was happening with myself and my brother, because we've been having a little bit of tussle recently, and he was pushing back on all kinds of stuff. And now I'm thinking he was doing that because he didn't think he was being heard. So that's the thing that struck me, and I thought, oh, yeah, that's right. That's exactly why he's pushing back, because he felt that I wasn't listening to him. And I realized that's the thing that I have to fix and my own thing, because if I do that to him, then okay, I'm hurt, but I'm not hearing him, and I'm going to fight with him all the time. So that perspective was it was weird. Like, you asked that question, and most of us answered that way. We thought, how does that affect me? But I think now I should think about, how does that affect the other person? If I'm not hearing them, if I'm not listening to them, how does it affect them? It's a very powerful notion. I didn't even, truly, Gary, I never thought of that, and it just struck me as the way you posed the question. So I'll just leave it.
Thank you. So on both sides, do you get a sense about the incredible human power that's bound up in these things, both sides of it, the being heard and sometimes the not being heard? Because if you connect this back to Bela's real need for people, the importance of people feeling empowered, then you begin to understand where some of that power lies. It runs really deep in who we are, but then how we express ourselves and our sense of ability to affect the people around us, the situations around us. Because if we do not have the power to feel heard, our power to impact, our power to express our agency, our power to live the lives that we choose is really affected. So as a topic to work on, is this the kind of thing that would hold importance? And why?
Gary, could I add an example? David Hall
Please,
here.
please.
It's possible to exaggerate this topic. I like the topic a lot, but it's possible to exaggerate it in terms of saying something that is so clear that those involved will never talk to you again.
Yes.
They go out of their way. And so, I won't go into details, but I was in a dean's meeting. It's one of the deans, and the president was trying to express something. And so I interrupted and expressed what he was trying to get to in perhaps a more clear manner. And at the end of my clarity, everyone in the room got up and left. And I've never spoken with them again. And then we had 5 court cases to discuss that discussion. And the only time I heard from them is when they gave testimony on occasion.
Yeah.
And so indeed, everyone admitted I was very clear. And they heard it very precisely. And that was it.
And I appreciate that, David, and on many levels, because I think it also speaks to the power of what we're talking about.
I think so too.
But that also goes to the point of the fact that people do not always want to hear that.
Yep, that's true. And 5 years later, it was demonstrated that that decision I was making fun of and wanted the president to not do ended up costing the university $65 million.
Yep.
And so a new governor, in essence, praised me for that comment, because everyone in New Jersey, I guess, had heard the comment. And so clarity can be really insightful and precise. But if you have to be careful of what words you use, then have you muddied everything?
There's a power and there's a vulnerability that comes with that kind of honesty. And that's the reason we're talking about this in the context of something like a conversation, and the necessity of people establishing the level of trust to be able to be that honest, to be that heard. Now, there's a lot of venues where people really do not value that honesty at all and want anything but honest things to be heard. It's like, dear God, are we experiencing that in all kinds of things in our country as much as any place else right now? The idea that there somehow should be alternative facts, or, we accuse people of fake news, or all the things that, don't lend people to that sense of power when they feel like the only thing they're supposed to do is either be quiet, not talk about it, or simply stay out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Oh, well, it gets tough out there.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes that's why we have to create an in here that's a little safer.
I once had a meeting with Donald Trump in 1992, and he vowed he would never talk to me again after that meeting. And I thanked him. I still thank him today that he's one person I never want to talk to again.
Yeah, yeah. So any other thoughts, other people, a sense about, what could be done by helping ourselves, helping others, beginning to work on things, plans, programs where people can begin to feel the sense of power and the sense of safety to be heard. Anna?
So I already talked about my childhood, so introduced topic of my marriage. I think what works sometimes is like scaffolding your thoughts that you want to express on other persons or whoever you're speaking with, the thoughts that they express, and that way for a moment they will think that the thoughts that you're putting out there are their own thoughts, and so they have a better chance of like absorbing them. So nobody wants your thoughts, people just want their own thoughts. So if somehow you can kind of plant your thoughts into like the soil of their thoughts, they're like an implant, like your body will reject it, but if you can kind of like pretend that I don't know, dental implant is do you know what I mean? Like if it's something more native in like a language that's more native, or maybe like surrounded by thoughts and feelings that the person already expressed, they are less likely to reject it. So that's my approach in my marriage.
Jenya?
Just wanted to raise another aspect, I guess. So I think being heard and feeling you are heard, there's layers in that.
Okay.
What is your capacity to hear? How much activated you are to react versus to hear? Do you have capacity to hear, and at which level are you listening? So the aspect that I want to bring in is, I think the fundamental question is not whether we want to be heard, or, to your question, how do we create spaces to practice this? The starting point is, how do we first create capacity in ourselves and others to actually have the space and our own capacity to have the conversations? And the trust is also important denominator as well, but it's all of these pieces.
Good. Thank you. So let's step back for a moment and think about the process that we're engaged in right now. Because this is, for me, the way that a conversation begins. It is the introduction of something that we believe is important enough to work on. And what we're barely scratching the surface of is that generative part. So where are each of us relative to this topic? What do we know, feel, think about it so far? But as we listen to others, what comes up as new ideas that we can begin to build on? We learn from, we hear differently, we begin to explore. And so this exploration phase really is the beginning of the first few days of what becomes a conversation event. And then that begins to shape and evolve and narrow too. So what do we think? What kind of new ideas can we come to? What new learning can we begin to express that can turn into something that seems to be of value to us, to others, that we can keep working on? So for any of you who've actually been involved in a conversation, any thoughts you have about that process and how it evolves from the beginning through the middle and towards some kind of outcome? And I realize those who have been involved is a small number, so I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But let me just say that this is the reason that it takes time. Once you begin this process, to really hear each other in a way that it allows for entertaining new ideas. That it's not just what I brought to the discussion. This is why it's so incredibly different than, people bringing their papers, bringing their theories, bringing their ideas to some kind of a meeting, a business meeting, a conference, a strategic planning meeting, whatever that is. People come with self-sealed ideas and normally combat each other about those. That's the typical process of that kind of a meeting or an event. The coming to listen, the coming to learn is just a whole different expectation. Zayon?
I think one thing about the conversation that I found an interesting parallel to was the experience of writing with a band in studio.
Okay.
Or an album, and this idea of doing preparation to fulfill different parts of a vision, different parts of a system. So even thinking of sonically or instrumentally, right? Drums, guitar, bass, different worlds, but coming together and interacting each other in terms of how the whole is, the final output is created. And in terms of the way that it's prepped, and even what Genio, you're saying about how close the topic is to your heart, people being very invested in it with often years of preparation on an instrument, years of thought, even sometimes, depending on how much people are thinking about it too, because there's many different types of process there. But I think over there, that importance of hearing each other and creating that container, that I think within the Banathy conversation, I feel that was one interesting approach where you go deep, but it's very directed.
Mm-hmm.
And it builds on the backs of, it stands on the shoulders of giants, but there's also a lot of validation and scientific approach in some ways. Yeah, that's all to say. I think just you were asking about take from people who had been there, but
yeah. Well, and thank you, Zayon. We can. Well, let me build on that just for a moment. So you've got, kind of a whole spectrum of musical understanding, performance, creativity. And so, if you're a classical musician and, you come to a performance of a given symphony and, essentially you're playing what has been pre-written, but you're doing it with a different director, right? And so not every performance is exactly the same. There is learning, there is evolution and creativity in those. When you're talking about a jazz band or a fusion band of some kind, where people bring the skills and the history they have of the things they know together, you can play the things right? You can play covers of other musicians' work, and that's good. And you can play your own variety of that. But to truly create something new means that you've got to let go of what you think in order to co-create in a way that is a new kind of learning process. And that's very typical of what can happen in a conversation kind of event. So, Badir.
I listen to you talking. My topic the last 3 month topic is, what I'm thinking about is, we are biased as a human being. We are not perfect, individual and in this group. And what's what surprised me sometimes, we have the bright people in the room. Doesn't mean necessarily as a group they will come up with the right decision. And we have history. We can talk about Kennedy, Coca-Cola, whatever. So there is a lot of experience. And when I think, how come when you have a lot of brain power, people that prove themselves, and we put in the room, it's not necessarily what they will come for it is holistically solution for the future. And that what you talk about depends which state you are coming to the meeting. Are you coming to push or to learn? For me, it's a start of a solution or solution.
That's an incredibly important part, Butter, of getting the right people to the room. And I can tell you I've been in conversations on both ends of that spectrum. And the right people in the room are people who are knowledgeable and willing to learn. And it doesn't mean they're the highest experts, because sometimes the highest experts are the least willing to listen and learn from anybody else. And, if you only bring your swords and battle axes, then, I'm sorry, you're going to end up with a mess, and that's the best you're going to do. So I can tell you from a facilitator standpoint that if you have the right people in the room, the facilitation is easy and light. And if you don't have the right people in the room, it's a challenge, and God help you to try to help them get something done, because it does begin with the willingness to learn and listen. So, David, I'm going to turn it back to you to begin. Oh, Peter, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that have always interests me is this that goes on is this silent conversation, and that goes on in between people when there's a conversation that's going on. And I think that's an interesting space to has been for me, and you can really tell a lot if someone is listening or not, or if someone is interested or not, with regards to that silent information, that silent conversation that's going on. And I think it's a place where you can knit ideas.
Mm-hmm.
You can really tell if ideas are being knitted, and you can go somewhere. So and music speaks to that. The creativity process speaks to that.
Thank you.
Gary, could I add one note?
Please.
Since I like your subject so much. Music was added, but I would like to also add humor. A few months ago, some magazine did an article on me, and on the cover, they had me with the expression that Hawk says that the more difficult things get, the more humor is essential in the difficulty. And then inside, they went into some depth on your subject, having to do with how do you know people are talking or listening or in the conversation, because these days it seems like they're not. Mm-hmm. That as there's more and more disharmony, there is less and less knowledge that the other person actually said something. So they did some study, which they included in their magazine, of when they found humor was present in the discourse, it was much clearer people were listening and people were there. That humor became a key indicator in some of the really tough business meetings that they had been measuring. So in addition to music, let's add the subject of humor and see where it falls.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, David, because it is another aspect. And maybe the comment I would have about that is there is humor which is used against people, like laughing at people, versus people learning to laugh together. Mm-hmm. And that kind of humor really does draw people together.
Or especially humor against yourself.
Yeah. Yes. The ability to laugh at oneself is a difficult trait.
And very important.
Yes. So, David Ng, I'm going to turn this back over to you to begin thinking about how you might shape Leading Towards May.
Thanks. I'm going to ask those who have experienced conversation a little bit to speak up, but I'll start off with the one because we went to Lugano, and Lugano conversation. We organized that one, um, and I ended up with a group because I am working on a dissertation. And we were working through the conversation, trying to, of course, explain myself. But one of the major results that came out of that conversation was that we had been framing the research I've been doing as systems changes learning, but it's not resonating with people. And so, as part of that, yeah, I'm working on two dissertations, not simultaneously, one at a time. The conversation came about pacing layers, and so the result of that conversation were that we actually have split off system changes work, which is mostly philosophical and theoretical, with the pacing changes work. And so Zad Khan has mostly been leading, in effect, the pacing changes stuff, while I'm still working on the pacing on the system changes work. So that's a personal thing for me that I wouldn't have been able to do alone. It's one of those situations where it takes a long time to unpack. We had an interesting group because the group included Frank, who's a Chinese, who's from China, and so he's doing all the language sorts of things. And we had the French student who was asking very precise definitional type questions. So but the camaraderie was there. Like everyone was open to learning, working through the ideas, and then contributing when it works and when it doesn't work.
Yeah. So just a footnote on there, real quick, David. That the makeup of that team did span everything from those two students who came in really with almost no knowledge about systems to you and several other people who had expertise, long decades of history in the topic as well as in systems principles. That was a big part of that. But as I watched the team work, one of the important pieces of those students was them asking questions that needed to be asked. Right? They just needed to know, and they needed it to be explained in a way that could be explained to other people. And so that diversity, the differences, in who was there was really critical, I think, to what the team achieved.
Yeah. So, Zian, Kala, Fran, anyone want to talk about their experiences in Iowa?
Yeah, I can offer. I think for me, the experience in Iowa, it's very similar to what we've been talking about the listening and learning. It felt very nice to have a community of support around learning in a way that felt similar to school, but not really either, because it was very conversational in that aspect. And it's in those conversations that learnings really start to land and really start to make sense. And it was in the silence between those sort of sessions that things really started to absorb. So, and having that done in succession with the time that we had and that immersion that is so critical, that's where things really started to kind of form a system in my head. And I think that that's what made it very interesting, because it's the and then the trust was really built after all of those sessions, in those times between sort of the days. So the way it's set up kind of walks you through all of those things of developing sort of trust, developing humility, developing your learning, and really sort of developing those connections and broader relationships that you see in systems.
Thank you, Cal.
Brandon, you have anything to say too? I feel like I've rambled a lot today, but if not, I think one thing that the setting and environment mattered a lot. I think being in a retreat space where you're kind of nobody's leaving for errands, nobody's going home even. Everyone was staying there. So that creates this kind of pressure cooker, not in a negative pressure sense, but almost like marination and letting the flavors go in deep. And I think spending 5 days consecutively reinforced that in a way that we had interesting breaks, right, of going out to check out the farm space, where that in itself was like an exploration of systems with looking at all the farm equipment, the major industrial scale, like things, animals. But I think this idea, like we're trained for many years in the MG Taylor design shop method, and I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that, but we've used it a lot for a lot of large group facilitations that like last multiple days. And I think one of the things from our training was with Bloomberg and the US Postal Service and doing a change management system for 10,000 employees. And over there, I think there's like, because there's conversation two ways, there's so much strategy involved at different levels that you need to be together in a space for at least 4 or 5 days to really come with any kind of meaningful situation, as opposed to doing the work piecemeal, kind of letting it scatter into the wind. There's something very powerful about being in a space for multiple days and the depth it allows, but also the human connections, trust, and vulnerability that affords.
So just as a note, so the conversation as we're organizing it, OCAD, is not the only necessarily the format that we would have. It's the one we're focused on right now. For those of you who actually would like a trip to Iowa, David Hawk is on the call. We could probably arrange to go back, have a different group in Iowa, or we could have the conversations elsewhere. In the fall we were talking about last fall we were talking about having one in China, and it was just a little too rushed for us to get the act together. But we can do these conversations elsewhere. We can do with other people. But we have to develop some of the skills more broadly, other than just having Gary flying all around the world. Does anyone have any questions about the planning for the May event that they would like to ask? I can give you more insight.
Is it Stephen?
Yeah, thanks. I'm just curious, so because you break down the dialogue, you have groups of 8, and then the groups then come back together again. So you've got like a smaller group dialogue, and then you've got a larger group dialogue, and then you've obviously got the fact that there is dialogue, and there seems to be an attention given to this listening process is given more time, maybe, so that there's a pause between people speaking to allow things to land. But I'm curious, because obviously then you can get to very large group processes, right? And then so it's like a mid-sized large group process, if that makes sense. But you've also got this smaller scale of like 8 people, which is kind of more team-like. So like, is it, because dialogue, you've got the BOEM dialogue, which doesn't have a teleology, doesn't have a orientation to a goal, and then you've got goal-directed sort of, and then you've got convening questions. You know, you've got these different ways of going about it. So when people are landing, what's the kind of, you know, you mentioned going strategic at some point. So and then you've got generative. So how do you get it so that people are in the similar generative zone and similar strategic zone?
So let me take that first, David, and you may have some other thoughts as well. So the reason for the teams of about 8 is simply for the teamwork itself. If you have fewer than maybe 5, you just don't have enough diversity of ideas to explore really deeply. If you have 10 or more people, you're almost inevitably going to have somebody who doesn't really get heard. You know, it's just really hard to have a chance to, when you're digging that deeply. If you have more voices than you can really accommodate, you're going to end up with some people just being kind of left out. So 8 is sort of that magic middle number, and it's, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9, something like that. That allows for the deep dive. and that allows for everyone to really be a part of that. Now, each given team may be more generative or more strategic in its own work relative to the topic and relative to its goals. So within a conversation, if we've got 4 teams, you might very well have one that does much more generative work the entire week, and one that begins with hopefully some real generative deep dive into the why they're working on this and the exploration, but they may have a much more strategic goal about the kind of things they want to work on and think about for that week. Between the teams, the part of I think the importance of the learning process is that the team members hear across the teams from each other how this is working, because each of those teams may be operating in ways that it's good to learn from. In fact, in a number of the conversations in Austria particularly, we'd end up having people borrowed from one team to another because they had expertise in something, or because, as it turned out, the teams ended up landing on things that had some similarities and they really wanted to learn from each other or learn from a particular expert. So the ebb and flow of those things, a part of the time is that we have to allow for people to do the work the teams need to do, but also that cross integration and really the digestion, the reflection that needs to happen along the way. Does that answer part of what you're asking, Stephen?
Yeah, that helped quite a lot actually. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The teams kind of have their own. The teams could be quite different if they want.
Yes.
Then you start to come together. And is there a particular way you come together? That's a special process, is it, in some way?
Well, logistically, most of the time, at the end of the day, we would set aside an hour for the teams to come present, kind of their process during the day to each other. Now, the way that the situation may be at OCAD, I don't know, and that's, we'll have to talk a bit, and David can help organize how the structure works for that. Just depending upon how much time people can devote to being there physically, and when we make the space for that cross integration and the other thinking.
Got you. Thanks.
There's interesting turn here in actually trying to orient towards a problematique, because that means that actually the sub teams are probably working on problems, or they may work on problematiques themselves. But it's possible that we could end up trying to or finding out that things mash together. So we haven't settled on we have a large list of potential problems that we could deal on, but a lot of this is driven by the interests of the participants. So we don't have an agenda as an organization, as a whole conversation to have any particular topic. It's what the participants find valuable. It is a self-organizing, autonomous sort of thing. We do have people, as Gary said, borrowed. I remember that we were working on one topic, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we actually had language action perspective, which I actually know, but I've never taught. And Alexander Laszlo, I was meeting at lunch. I said, "Have you actually lectured on language action perspective?" I said, "Sure." I said, "Can we borrow you for an hour?" I just have never, I know it. I've never lectured. I said, "Sure." And he came over a little bit and he gave us a lecture on it. So it helps out. So the knowledge goes across. And because it really is a systems thing, problematique is a systems thing. The reorientation away from systems methods and systems theory. Greg Van Alstyne actually noticed that in the proceedings that were showing up. I think we're actually going back to some of Bela Banathy's original ideas that were more associated with Club of Rome, problematique sorts of issues. Okay, we're almost at time, so I think we're going to close out. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I just wanted to maybe just take a moment to say to Gary and as well David, to say thank you for bringing this type of thinking and thought leadership type of approach to to talk in, and I think it's a really important method, and our approach is very human oriented, and it gives us a method of structure to really have meaningful conversations. And it's new to me, and I guess I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to sharing that. It's very generous of you both.
Well, thank you to you, Peter, and to everyone here for taking the time on an evening to participate.
So just to close out, I haven't actually figured out when we're going to make the formal announcement. This is kind of like leaking out information. So if people here are interested in forming their own teams, or they have a problem they're working on, if you have a research project you're working on and you want to get a team together to work on that, we're open to listening to that. But I expect we're working towards a reintroducing sLab event. So I think over the next couple of weeks, we may actually have some potential teams forming, and then we can speak to larger groups. But if you have an interest, just let me know and speak up. And with that, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you at the next System Thinking Ontario next month.
Good.